Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Think Bitcoin podcast, where I talk to Bitcoiners about culture, art, philosophy, and living well. Today's guest is Trey Walsh. Trey is the founder and executive director of the Progressive Bitcoiner Inc., which is a 501c3 devoted to building a more financially inclusive and just world through Bitcoin advocacy, education, and research. I've known Trey a very long time. He is truly a committed, unwavering advocate for Bitcoin's use as a tool to improve the world. In this episode, Trey and I discuss all things politics and Bitcoin, touching on a wide array of other topics in the process. As always, please like, rate, and subscribe to the show. It truly is much appreciated. Now, without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Trey Walsh. All right, we are live. Trey Walsh, welcome to Think Bitcoin. How are you?
Good, Logan. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thanks for being here, Trey. So, Trey, I think most people who would be listening to this, I am sure that they know who you are. They know what the Progressive Bitcoiner is. But for those who might not, can you just give us some obligatory background about what you're doing in the space, what you're doing with the Progressive Bitcoiner?
Yeah, so I'm Trey Walsh. I've been in kind of the Bitcoin space, or kind of known about Bitcoin since 2021. Really, rode that kind of crazy wave back then, and then started. The Progressive Bitcoiner was started by a group of people, really, but the first podcast host was Mark Stefani, who is our board president currently. And then I took over as host of the podcast a couple of years ago, and then we turned the little podcast into a nonprofit officially this past January. And really, our focus is on educating progressives about Bitcoin. I think that's the kind of biggest thing. There's a big gap in that side of education, content, promotion. In the very partisan world of the U.S. that we live in, very particular to the U.S. I think the rest of the world isn't quite as partisan in the same way on Bitcoin. So we're ripe for having this be our cause right now. And again, 5-10 years down the line, the goal would be that we don't even have to say things like progressive in Bitcoin, and that it's really just kind of a nonpartisan. It's a part of every fabric of our culture and civilization and economy that Bitcoin is baked in. But we're still super early. I mean, that might be 10, 20, my whole lifetime fighting for this cause. So yeah, that's a little bit of me. And my background is I've been in nonprofits the past decade, focusing on like anti-poverty work, youth development work, legal aid work, just a little bit of everything here in the greater Boston area where I am. And Bitcoin for me was a solution to a lot of problems in a way. I don't think it fixes everything, but for me, it made a lot of sense and clicked a few years ago, focusing on that like social justice, social good thing. And I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of that in this episode, but I think there are a lot of problems that don't have good solutions. And once I found Bitcoin, I'm like, that clicks on a lot of things here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you and I, Trey, I want to say we met probably in 2021. I would say, I think
Probably, yeah.
probably mid late 2021. And so
Yeah, I feel
we
like I read your newsletter. Well, you know what? Probably saw you on what Bitcoin did. And I think that was after, though. I had either connected via DMs or kind of saw your Substack, things like that. Back then, yeah.
Yeah, so we're kind of gathering some moss on us. We're getting some mileage on us. We're about, I guess, we're almost kind of 4 or 5 years down the road, I guess, from 2021. In 2021, I think you and I were both pretty interested in, I guess, kind of the political dimensions of Bitcoin and how it fits in or doesn't fit into the, I guess, political alignment of the United States, which, as we all know, is hyperpolarized. And you've just talked a lot about, your mission at the Progressive Bitcoiner to educate folks on the political left. Do you think that we have made progress since 2021 in that regard? How would you compare the where we were in 2021 when you and I kind of first started having conversations about this, and we're both concerned about this becoming a partisan issue that was mostly favored by the right? Do you think we've made progress? Where do you think we are, and kind of how do you see things now?
Yeah, I think we've made a lot of progress. I'll say that off the forefront. I think back in 2021, I think a lot of the the Bitcoin narrative and the scene and the conversations were it's kind of what happened post COVID, right? A lot of people went into their tribal groups, and I think there was a big the kind of libertarian post COVID anti-vax, all of these things, right? Contingent got really, really loud in Bitcoin and on social media in particular. And I think a lot of news and organizations and things picked up on that. So that was a huge part of the Bitcoin narrative is that it's right wing. The environmental narrative was really, really bad against Bitcoin at the time, and a lot of that was there wasn't enough good data to show that actually a good amount of Bitcoin mining is done with renewable energy, is done with energy that is really low cost and kind of off the grid and using a lot of hydro and things like that. So there's a huge FUD against the environmental narratives of Bitcoin mining. But I think at this point, it's kind of a it's almost a catch-22. It's good, but it depends on what you view as the Trojan horse theory of Bitcoin, where, it's going more and more mainstream for better and for worse. Like this thing that I think you and I got into and a lot of Bitcoiners got into that is freedom money, that is permissionless, peer-to-peer electronic cash, everything from the white paper and kind of the ethos of what Bitcoin is. Like Bitcoin is an open protocol. Anyone can use it for anything. So it's getting really, really popular with Wall Street, obviously the Trump administration, a lot of these things for people that wish to use Bitcoin just as digital gold or a dumb rock or a stock or an ETF or whatever. But I'd say we've made a lot of progress. We at the Progressive Bitcoiner, but just in general, a lot of people pushing for this on especially the environmental front. It's too big to ignore at this point. I think a lot of people continuously calling for Bitcoin is dead, Bitcoin is going nowhere. It's, more and more people are owning it, are, having it, whether it's in an ETF or in self custody. It's getting too big for politicians to ignore on the left. So they're engaging with Bitcoin. The the place we're at now, and it's good. I think a lot of them are no longer, Elizabeth Warren's like anti-crypto army, that's pretty much dead in terms of like, oh, we're trying to make sure this thing doesn't exist. I think they've moved on to that. Now it's consumer protections. There's a lot of stuff around KYC, AML, Bank Secrecy Act, Patriot Act. I mean, there's a lot of things that are very concerning to me about the way that government and politicians could interact with Bitcoin, just crypto in general, but also it kind of goes beyond that into freedom tech and other things. So we're at a place where it's too big to ignore and they're willing to engage with it. So that's good. So now I view it as the real work begins to make sure that we proceed that people can use Bitcoin as freely as possible, can hold it. And obviously it's kind of no surprise and understanding like banks are interacting with it, all of these things. Bitcoin was birthed out of the global financial crisis. So governments and banks aren't necessarily going to be the best allies on our quest for freedom money. But our hope is that we can have people, voters, be loud enough about what they care about. We're still trying to educate and do that to where politicians can ignore it. They can't just simply attack self-custody or privacy or things like that. So that's the long story short, the fight we're in is that we're actually beginning to have good work on it because they can't dismiss it anymore as like, oh, it's not a real thing, it's a Ponzi. You're hearing less and less of that. Now it's like, okay, it is a real thing, but how are we going to interact with it? What does this look like in the world at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think there was for a time there was a little bit of fear, at least on my end, that this was going to be kind of politically executed, sort of murdered by the left in its infancy, that they were just going to completely write it off. And I think it's in large part, I mean, the diligent work that you guys have been doing, I think, is a big part of that, which is almost like a person by person, you know, mind changing campaign, which is really yeoman's work. Do you find that in your conversations with progressives that folks on the left, and I know you're now talking to lawmakers and staffers, do you find that do you find yourself trying to convince them about how Bitcoin fits into their pre-existing, I guess, kind of perceptual framework of what it means to be a Democrat or a progressive? Or do you find yourself trying to elucidate maybe more fully for them what the implications of their progressiveness um, might be and how Bitcoin kind of fits into that? If that makes sense as a question.
It does. It does. I think both. I'll start off by saying, Bitcoin is a tool, it's technology, it's open source tech. I think anyone from any background, politically, religion, sex, gender, whatever, can use it. But at the same time, once you really start to grasp what the cypherpunks were after for decades and decades, what money separate from the state is after, human empowerment, human flourishing, these type of things, it does butt into some of the preconceived notions about what the role of the government is in certain areas, what the role of social good is in certain areas, what the role of, if you're a climate activist, is in certain areas, and you're butting up against change that hasn't been possible in ways that Bitcoin mining might be pretty cool to use in that regard. So it's a little bit of both. I think the conversation with folks always starts with, what Bitcoin is and how it fits into their whatever beliefs and values that they have. And then over time, they might start to realize that, oh, actually, this does better than some other things that I thought, right? And I think, my background in nonprofits as well, like I saw firsthand a lot of cycles of poverty and things like that that are in place that the government in a lot of ways has helped support through bad fiscal policy over the decades. And I say that as someone who, and again, I think going forward, what you see too politically is everyone kind of sees these charts at this point. The rise of people considering themselves independents continues to go up year after year after year. Now, that is true, but at the same time, at the end of the day, people still resort to voting for a left or right bucket. So I think what that tells me is there are a lot of people that are unsatisfied with the status quo. They're not satisfied with Democrats. They're not satisfied with Republicans. They're looking for something else, but then they still resort to tribal, dualities on this topic. So I almost view I don't get in too much trouble here. It's almost like the progressive Bitcoiner movement. It's not that it's a new political party, but a lot of us on this side of things are not really comfortable in either camp or whatever camp you put us into. And I do think one thing that I've learned that's butted up against some of my preconceived notions or camp is, both of us former Bernie bros and in some regards belief in a big controlling central government. Some of the things that I've learned that's really cool going forward, and we just don't have a framework or political ideology for this quite yet, because I wouldn't consider myself a right libertarian. I'm still more so in the progressive camp if you had to pick on certain issues. Right. But I think a lot of technology, a lot of freedom tech, a lot of Bitcoin gives it to where individual people and communities have more power now that they didn't have previously. They had to rely on a bank. They had to rely on whatever modes of communication, all of these things that a lot of freedom tech is helping, a lot of Bitcoin is helping. So people have more tools than ever to live self sovereignly. And again, I'm saying all of these buzzwords that people will be like, that's a right wing buzzword or that's whatever. I really just don't see it that way. I think people have more freedom and choice than ever now. And Bitcoin is one of those tools that means that you do not have to rely on a central authority. Now, taking a step back, I think that both the right and the left rely on central authorities in different ways. I think the Trump administration is extremely central authority and authoritarian in a lot of ways that Democrats are in a different way. So again, I think coming into Bitcoin, and if you're devoting your life to, a human rights approach, using Bitcoin as a freedom tool, all of these things, it exposes a lot that's wrong with our political system, the way that we operate as a society, and the way that things can be different. Now, that doesn't mean I think that there's a call to overthrow the government tomorrow and all of these things that some people associate with Bitcoiners, because I think that would hurt a lot of people. But do I see a transitional phase over decades and centuries where more and more people are relying on their local communities and freedom tech and less reliant on the fiat system, on the dollar, on central banking, on it's no mistake. People talk all the time about like Social Security is running out, like all of these things, right? I think on a long enough time horizon, we kind of see where this is headed. I'd like for people to be equipped with things that don't rely on these systems that, quite frankly, Democrats don't have good answers for at the end of the day. That's one of my biggest frustrations is that they're continuously trying to pile people into these programs that they know at some point there is a cliff. At some point, there's not an answer. I'd like people to be as best equipped as possible. And I think Bitcoin does that from a financial lens, but beyond that as well. But I could ramble on that forever and ever. And back to your original point, I think you have to start with people at a certain point. Let's say that someone is not to pick on her, it's just an easy case. And here, Massachusetts, like Elizabeth Warren voter, all of these things. And this is what I did a lot in DC. I literally met with her staffers. You talk in a language they can understand. You talk about consumer protections. You talk about scams and frauds and how to avoid that and how to empower people and communities. You talk in a language they can understand because there is a world in which Bitcoin fits perfectly with what Elizabeth Warren is fighting for. That doesn't mean that I think Elizabeth Warren will be the biggest Bitcoiner at the end of the day. I think there may be some fundamental disagreements there, but I do think there's a world in which a voter or someone with that value set can put enough pressure. Donors can put enough pressure because that's the way our politics works. That those things begin to shift, and you see potentially a bullish tone from these politicians. Is that my goal at the end of the day? No, I think my goal is to make sure that people can use Bitcoin as freely as possible and have fundamental rights that tie back to civil liberties. I don't necessarily need or want a politician to be bullish on Bitcoin, or I don't care how much they buy themselves or whatever, but I want to see people well educated on it and being able to use it as freely as possible because I think it will help their lives.
There's so much that I want to ask you. Coming off of that, you raised so many good points and interesting, thought provoking ideas there. One of the things that I want to, well, I mean, I guess I'll just say, I think one of the things that we all find frustrating is you were talking about the value set of like what we would consider a typical Elizabeth Warren voter, or like a typical Massachusetts Democrat, something like
Mhm.
that. Again, not to pick on Massachusetts,
Yep.
but typical Democratic value set. I think the frustration for people like you or me a lot of the times is thinking, well, if this truly is the value set that you have, if these really are your values, then it would seem logically that you would, maybe it doesn't mean that you would be a full-throated Bitcoiner, but you would at least be more willing to entertain conversations about it, hear conversations about it, and welcome arguments for how it can further those values. And it just, for the longest time, just did not seem uh, like the typical Elizabeth Warren voter, and especially her, Elizabeth Warren herself, that they were willing to do that. And it does seem like that is changing, which is good. But I want to touch on another thing that you said. The purpose of this show, the reason why I decided to kind of just jump back into all this and make this show, is because I believe that the world is going to continue to Bitcoinize. I think Bitcoin is going to continue to be an increasingly important part of the world as like a globally important asset. And I think what that means is that it's going to sort of catalyze, I guess, kind of a cultural paradigm shift. We're going to be in kind of a big, decades long transitional phase where we're just all figuring out what does this look like on the other side of this, because this is an absolutely massive undertaking and a massive change here that I think Bitcoin's gonna bring about. And so what that means to me is there's going to be an opportunity for Bitcoiners to reshape cultural discussions, public debates, public discourse. Just there's the idea of the Bitcoiner, I think, is going to have more salience, and I think there's a responsibility of Bitcoiners to really be engaged with that and to treat that with some sincerity and to try to shape the public discourse in a way that's robust, that's nuanced, and kind of modeling the renaissance of culture that we would all like to see. And I think politics is an important part of that. And I'm interested in an idea that you were bringing up about all these independent voters, because I think that one of the things that might happen in this transitional phase is, to the extent that we've ever had a decent opportunity in this country to potentially re-architect or kind of reorg a new political party or affiliation, or maybe just take the existing ones and meaningfully alter them, I think now, or maybe the next 10, 20 years, is probably that time. Do you agree with that? Do you think, because I mean, it's probably more, I mean, Elon is obviously trying to do this thing with the New America Party or whatever, and I'm not super optimistic about that. But do you think that within each existing party, there's room or possibility for uh, meaningfully changing them, or how do you see this block of independent voters that you're referencing evolving, and where do they land, and where do you think that's going?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, America will I think for the foreseeable future, probably in our lifetime, we'll have a tough time with a multi-party approach because I know, like, Andrew Yang talks about that a lot, with the Ford Party and other things since what, 2016, 17, 2015, really. we're not necessarily European nations or other places that have this rich history of multi-party parliaments and things like that. I do foresee in our lifetime that it'll continue to be Democrats and Republicans. But one thing I posit to kind of the left is, look at the right, look at the GOP. Is that even recognizable today compared to 10 years ago? Right. So for me, I do think there's always room. Like Donald Trump, but even aside from that, showed that you can completely recreate. Like a lot of Donald Trump's values are not the values of the GOP 10 years ago, like fiscal conservative spending, um, conservative religious values. I think there's still a lot there, but on a lot, there is not. And Donald Trump is more progressive in some regards in that value set compared to conservative religious Christians that were daily talking about trying to end or ban same-sex marriages and relationships, and all of these things were kind of regularly talked about in the platform. That's not as much anymore. It's still state and local, this and that. But I think there is room for, and again, I'm wearing my me as a person and an individual. Now that I'm an executive director of a 501c3, we are the Progressive Bitcoiner, the nonprofit, is nonpartisan in that we're promoting education from a progressive values set. So it's not Democrats or endorsing candidates or anything like that. And we're very proud about that stance. So we're reaching anyone with progressive values, and progressive values can flow amongst in and outside of parties. But me as an individual outside of the organization, I'd say I would like to see a new progressive movement that's very different than the left. And I think now is a great time over these next few years, especially the Democrats are trying to recreate themselves, move on from the Obama, Clinton, Biden days that continue to not work. And I think there is a split in the party, and I think there is a split right now between those old Democrats and some of the newer, um, more socialist leaning. What's the word I'm looking for as well? The more populist approaches to that. I don't think long term that bodes well in terms of civil liberties and American values. And this is where I get possibly canceled by many on the left. I don't think that socialism works in the US the same way that it has in Europe, per se, in some other smaller European countries. I think that American values and civil liberties are baked into democracy and some sort of free market approach. And I think Bitcoin fits in nicely with that. Again, if you were to look at kind of Bitcoin and the values and ideals that a lot of Bitcoiners have, and a lot of Bitcoiners would say they don't have, values, or there is no Bitcoiner community. But to your point, and while I was excited when you kind of talked about what this podcast is and this approach is the arc where like some of the beginning is like there is Bitcoin culture, and then it goes up the curve and it's like there is no Bitcoin culture, blah, adds all these contexts, and then I've landed at the point where I'm like, there is a Bitcoin culture, and it can actually be a good positive thing. I don't mean the silly, you have to be a carnivore, no seed oils, this and that. That's not the dietary stuff, not religious stuff, but I mean a culture that really focuses on really positive freedoms and positive things, like having a family, having a clean, healthy environment and society. Spending time outside, spending time less connected into this political duopoly, saving your money and being fiscally responsible with Bitcoin, starting businesses and nonprofits and being charitable. I do think maybe Bitcoiners might need to work on the charitable bit a little bit more, like being charitable, good community members. That is something that at the end of the day, if someone's like, oh, those Bitcoiners are like helping that community, or those Bitcoiners run awesome events or meetings, or those Bitcoiners just so hospitable, that would be great to hear. And I would advocate for that positive Bitcoin culture. So that was a long-winded answer to what you said, but there is definitely room within both parties. We're already seeing it, kind of the GOP run with this, right? But I think a long-term sustained belief, I do, kind of to your point, it's a little tangential, but I do think that we will have to continue to engage in partisan ways to play the game currently as this transition happens. And what I mean by that is, I connected with the folks at Bitcoin Policy Institute, and they're like, well, Trey, you guys at the Progressive Bitcoiner can have some conversations that we might not be able to because your name is the Progressive Bitcoiner. Do I think that's kind of silly? Yes. But do I lean into that and meet with Senator Warren's office in good faith? 100%. And we do that knowing that that is how change is made in this country. And the hope is that one day Bitcoin is nonpartisan, that this Bitcoin culture can thrive, that Bitcoin is seen as this positive movement that is intertwined with American values. And I think that's something, to Gladstein's credit. When I was at the Bitcoin Policy Summit a few weeks ago, he gave a speech, and he knew where he was. He knew he was in DC. He knew the target audience, and he said something like, Bitcoin and America are completely symbiotic. Like the value set is the same. Like, private property, free market, like civil liberties, that a Bitcoin and America go hand in hand. Like in terms of the best of what we can imagine the American experiment is, which I'm a sucker for history and kind of that dreaming of what that is and can be, when a lot of people, especially on the left, I think have ceded that to the right or given up on that project. I have not. Maybe having a kid has made me soft to believe in that again and want to see an America that's really thriving. And Bitcoin, I think, is a part of this. So yeah, Bitcoin is deeply tied to American values. I think for us to get to that nonpartisan place, people digging in to their partisan camps where they can, to then change so that everything blends together to where it's no longer a right or left. It's that, oh, Republicans might think about it and use it this way, and Democrats use it this way. Or if you're a Christian, or if you're a Muslim, or you're poor, you're rich, it's just interwoven into the fabric of what it means to be an American, is tied deeply to Bitcoin.
I want to table the positive freedom conversation, which I definitely want
Mhm.
to have here momentarily, because I think it's so fascinating, and I think kind of it's kind of the crux of, I think a lot of the issues that we have as a country are due to getting out of equilibrium in the negative freedom versus positive freedom focus. And I think both political parties are kind of a little bit out of whack on them, and I do think Bitcoin is this very interesting. Um, it's sort of almost like a balm on that. We will touch on that. I'm curious to know, do you think that because you're talking about some of the economic platform of Democrats now, and you were mentioning, I think that this is sort of like the True Detective meme of like time is a flat circle. I
Mhm.
think some of the Trump stuff, you were getting into this, Trump has like completely recreated the Republican Party in a way that is, kind of an equal parts interesting. For some people, it's horrifying. But he he has taken some issues that have even been traditionally left and kind of flipped them to right. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of some of the immigration stuff, not all of it or necessarily the extent of it, but
Mhm.
if you were to listen to Bill Clinton talk about immigration in like 1996, the whole a lot of the immigration discussion back then on the left was basically out of this, labor union, trade union type of protecting workers from falling wages and from, an influx of other people into the workforce that would, decrease their wages and all that stuff. And you can YouTube, Bill Clinton talking about this in ways that if you didn't know it was Bill Clinton, it would sound a lot like JD Vance or Donald Trump
Yep.
right now. And it's interesting how that kind of goes full circle, and perhaps Democrats will kind of come around to certain things that they aren't right now. But in some ways, I also find it discouraging because I feel like we're just in this continuous loop that we're trying to
Uh-huh.
just extract ourselves from entirely. Um, but do you think that? I guess one of the things that I struggle with is I think the economic, I guess, platform of the left seems almost anathema to Bitcoin, um,
Mhm.
just in terms of the role of markets, the role or the potential benefits or the trade-offs involved in free markets, because there are trade-offs. And you mentioned, you didn't want to get canceled by your brothers and sisters on the left.
I
But
mean, I already have been
so,
in many ways. Now, I say that like online. Like I've had conversations with people. Like I live in a very liberal hub, and I love my community where I live, and I've had conversations with them about this stuff. And off social media, off mic, off all those things, they're like, yeah, I can see that. It's pretty civil. It's pretty civil, but that's a whole nother conversation.
yeah, no, I think my wife and I talk about this all the time, that if if the if the left will kind of rethink economically in a way that was a little friendlier towards, I guess, what Bitcoin kind of stands for, the free
Mhm.
market type of stuff, and then married that with some of their social positions, that I think would be an attractive platform for a lot of politically homeless people. It's not perfect, but I find it's just difficult to envision a Democratic Party or a progressive wing of the Democratic Party that is not so wedded to this idea of a completely centralized economy. I mean, you look at like Mamdani, in New
Mhm.
York and stuff like that. I
Yep.
mean, that is totally, regardless of whether we agree or disagree with some of his opinions on social issues, from an economic perspective, it seems completely antithetical to Bitcoin. And how do you navigate that as someone trying to sway and convince people on the left of Bitcoin's value? How do you navigate how it seems to kind of come right up against deeply held economic beliefs on their side?
Yeah, it's really hard. I think it's back to the original point of knowing the audience, knowing the conversation, knowing, is it a public platform? Is it private behind closed doors? All of these things. And I think, even within the Democratic Party, for instance, you have a good core of people in the party or considering a 2028 run or any of these things. I mean, Ro Khanna is a good example. Like I don't think I've actually ever read it, but what was his book like, Progressive Capitalist or something like that, right? That kind of mold and idea fits in well with Bitcoin. And again, when people say capitalism today and a lot of the ways that I still kind of believe in some of these Bernie tropes of rugged individual, a rugged individualism for kind of the poor and everyday people and, socialism for the rich. That is how capitalism in a lot of ways works in this country. And again, I'm not going to get to, it's kind of like socialism's never been tried. Capitalism, it's not about that. That's why I prefer the term free market, honestly, just to say that. And again, it's back to the tools, right? Like nowadays, there are many more tools that individuals have if governments and societies can get out of the way or not fight this to be more entrepreneurial. I think we've seen a rise in, I mean, the immigrant community is a great example, which is really funny to me when the Democrats lean into more of a socialist stance when a lot of these immigrants communities come from socialist places and they're like, no, 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 no. And that's why you've seen a lot of folks that are not white turn to the Republican Party because they see them as more freedom, more all of these things where I'm like, what are we, just as a political consultant class, the Democrats have wasted so much money when I'm like, I can tell you in 2 seconds where you went wrong on that front, right? So again, I think nowadays, not saying, oh, 20 years ago we needed more socialism or something like that. But what I am saying is nowadays we have more tools, we have more opportunities for people to make a living, get creative, use tools like AI, all of these things that are coming to more and more individual people with this thing in your pocket that's never been seen before. So why do we have governments and the Democratic Party going in more of a centralized way when it's actually never, it's easier than ever before to find ways to be entrepreneurial, to not have to rely on these old structure systems. I mean, the amount of like gig economy workers, and that's a whole conversation about, is that good, is that not, um, for people? But there's a lot of ways to be more individualistic, more self-sovereign, all of these things that, you know, I think a lot in the Democratic Party understand and see this. And I would like the Democrats to talk more about the working class and innovation and a lot of the talking points that Ro Khanna has, I think, and less about, and to be fair, like Mamdani, a brilliant marketer, brilliant campaigner. I've seen some of his videos. I'm like, he is crushing it in terms of like, I was telling my wife this the other day. Like I was scrolling through Instagram and one of his videos popped up and I sat and I watched the whole thing. It was 2 minutes. When usually I just keep scrolling and I'm like, I didn't even realize I watched the whole thing because it was so engaging. It was so captivating. And I'm like, wow. And to his credit and to what I think a lot on the right politically don't do, is the right might have the media attention to capture, but I don't think they're helping life get better for poor people in a lot of ways. I don't think so. It's people like Mamdani are like I think I don't know about him. I've heard conflicting things from friends in New York, but a lot of people on the left that have maybe the wrong solution, they do care and they want to see life be better. But if you're not willing to address some of the core issues and you're not willing to be open to new innovative approaches with Bitcoin or more free market ideas because you feel like it doesn't fit into your nice, neat box, I don't have room to talk with those folks anymore. So again, that's why I'm doing this nonprofit media talking to people approach and why I'm not in that duopoly. I don't think I'd be very good at it. Talk to Mark Stefani. He has this belief that more Bitcoiners should run for office. How do we get in there in the first place? Is a good question when it's like, well, we need to just cancel a lot of this stuff and then go back to the drawing board. Um, does that answer your question a little bit though? It's
Yeah,
kind yeah.
and it's interesting. I find it so frustrating. Actually, I feel like so much of this, and maybe this is why it seems like some of the political work is so difficult and challenging to scale outreach. And I'm sure you guys think about that all the time. Like, how do we scale this? Because you're going basically person to person. And I think the reason why you have to go person to person almost, it seems like to me, is that there's so much semantic baggage that we need to jettison and throw off that
Mhm.
even right now, we're still stuck in almost this like Baudrillard simulacrum of a political debate where
Mhm.
we're still using these terms, socialism and capitalism, these
Yeah.
kind of terms that come out of Marx. I mean, these are
None of it fits anymore.
yeah,
That's the
exactly.
biggest
This is
thing.
like
Like,
100
post-COVID,
years
none of it
right.
fits anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with you, and I think that there's so much of people using these words, and they don't that they're not. We're losing the like the referent to the symbol or whatever. There's
Mhm.
no they don't like refer to anything real anymore. When you say that, and I agree with you. I don't think they are applicable anymore. But I don't think that everybody else has gotten there yet. I don't think everybody else has
No.
reached that conclusion yet. And there's
Yep.
this big gap right now, this big disjunction where we're still using this language that is not useful at all,
Mhm.
and that is this relic, this vestige of a totally different both political and monetary paradigm and I'm wondering, it just does seem it seems really hard to scale that. I think I run up against this myself all the time, and I've kind of almost stopped trying in some ways, and I'm kind of maybe approaching it from a different way now through this show. But how do you guys think about that of scaling? And maybe it is Mark's thing of just people running for office and trying to change the conversation. But I mean, we it's almost down to the language itself, and we got to figure out new terms to use. Just things that have a stronger relationship to what's actually going on in reality and aren't just these, you know, weird old vessels of like kind of old ideas.
Yeah, I think, again, it's knowing your audience. So I think having this deeper, longer conversation here, having those closed room conversations, but also, like, through, the Progressive Bitcoiner, whether it's our website, through media and more podcasts we wanna roll out. One thing that I realized is that we really need, like, more short form content. And one of the things that I'm working with Jason Mayer on, like, I kind of created this, like, Bitcoin, a guide for progressives, which was just a really simple, like, 5 pager of how Bitcoin can speak to your values on whether it's like social justice, whether it's financial inclusion, whether it's the environment. It's like little one pagers for people to see and just to be out there. And the number of hits on our website, the number of people that were like, oh, I use this and I brought this to my state rep that I met with, or I brought this to my friend, or this and that, like things like that. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's getting real live feedback on what we're putting out there. If I had my way, I'd sit down, do an in-person 3 hour long podcast and muse about the most weird and interesting ways to think about life, society, and Bitcoin. That'd be great. So I have that mode of me, but also our work with the Progressive Bitcoin. The biggest thing is like, okay, we're working with someone on social media currently. We're going to be working on more 30-second videos to put on TikTok. I hate TikTok, but so many people use TikTok, and we'll be working with people that know how to do that. We'll have more podcast hosts so that someone can listen into one podcast host they really like that focuses on, Bitcoin for women in Kenya. Just these things that are like, how can you be against that? So we're at the stage where, like, you and I 4 or 5 years ago would have been like, I get it. But people that they hear about Bitcoin and they don't even know why it was created. They don't even know you can send it. They're just like, oh, I think I can, like, buy that on Robinhood or buy that ETF or whatever. They think it's the same thing as Trump coin. Like, that's the place we're at with the nonprofit. So I have, me as an individual being able to nerd out with my Bitcoin friends. And then for our organization, the stage we're at is just getting out that really short form content because, again, I can fight it all I want. But the big reality is people's attention spans are so short and so brief. People do have these preconceived notions that they've been led astray quite a bit. And it's not saying, oh, our platform or Bitcoiners are the arbiters of truth and this and that. It's like, no, just kind of whether you're believing lies on the right or believing lies on the left or wherever it is about certain things, just that kind of political capture, just some real, like, kind of nonpartisan, oh, this is what Bitcoin mining is. This is a cool use case of it for, like, gridless. Oh, this is how you can send Bitcoin and you don't have to rely on Western Union that takes like 30% fees. Just very practical use cases. And then people will, just as I did, go down the rabbit hole, as we say, and explore on their own beyond that. But I think we're still at that entry point with typical progressives, typically on the left. And there's a large part of, on the extreme left, maybe, that won't even look into it because it says Bitcoin, and that's fine. We're not going to reach everyone. A lot of those people are going to be using Bitcoin and not even realize it in 20, 30 years. It's going to be in their retirement portfolio, all of these things, and they'll never be like Bitcoiners or think about using it. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to think that maybe a couple years ago I probably would have told you, look, there are too many Bitcoin podcasts. There's too much Bitcoin content already.
Uh,
These people are, they're all saying the same thing. And I've admittedly come pretty much totally full circle. And now I think that volume is the game. And I think volume of all different types of content. And I actually think, I mean, maybe not just volume, but volume with variety. And I think, I'm talking to Stephen Lubka
uh-huh.
soon, and he has, his whole the running
I,
joke
I
about what
messaged him and I'm like, this is your wheelhouse, dude. You gotta jump on because I think I shared it in like a message group we're in of like this podcast. And it's like, you gotta go on. This is your alley, man. Also,
yeah,
let me just side note of like how cool Steven is. So like Steven has a lot of views that maybe would be more like let's say a typical left person would view it as like Maha or like sun. This guy likes the sun. This guy is that, but he's so freaking nice. It's what's
yeah,
so funny to me is like he's so nice. He's the epitome of like what good Bitcoin culture can be. You just can't be mad or frustrated with the dude. Like if you come in as like that crying liberal meme, like Steven would be able to like bring them along for a sun walk, like barefoot. Like that
yeah,
is like such a positive Bitcoin culture move. We need more of that. So
totally. Yeah, he's what I'm going to talk to him a lot about is the positive freedom stuff too, just because I do think he's maybe more so than anybody that I know, is kind of the literally walking embodiment of what positive freedom looks like, and people really respond to that. And I think I think
uh,
there's a lesson in there. But he has all kinds of ideas and points that he makes that are sort of half tongue in cheek, but also sort of reveal almost a profound and profoundly simple truth, and they're sort of funny, but also totally true. And one of them is the joke about we just need more Bitcoin podcasters, and and initially you think, oh, that's ridiculous, but I actually think I'm at the point now. I think it's completely and totally true. I think that the more folks and different types of folks with different interests coming to it from different angles, the more that we're doing that, I think the more ubiquitous that Bitcoin comes, the more that different people find something that they can identify with, something that makes sense to them. I just think that the preconditions for people to see how Bitcoin can be valuable to their life are just too. They're just like the air that we breathe. I mean,
uh,
it's everywhere. They're undeniable. So it's just a matter of finding the right sort of access point, and that's why I mean what you guys are doing at TBB on the political side, and you and I were kind of talking yesterday a little bit. And what I'm trying to do is just take another little niche, another little small part here, of culture, art, humanities, stuff like that, and politics is a part of that, but drilled down much more with what you guys are doing. And I just think that the more that we do that, the more people are going to come on board. But I want to jump into this positive freedom conversation a little bit, just because this is one of my favorite topics. It usually ends up with me talking about infinite jest, and
You
I'm
know
going
what's
to
funny?
try.
Infinite Jest. I wish I could point the camera down. I have like my mic stood on books. It just so happens it's the book right under the microphone right now, which is really funny.
Perfect, exquisite. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
yeah, no, that's perfect. I'm glad. I
They're
hope
such
that
millennials.
it should be a requirement actually. That everybody who comes on the show, and to the extent if you have a microphone, a podcast microphone, it has to rest on infinite jest.
Infinite Jest. That's funny.
So I've actually, as another aside, I'm interested. So Infinite Jest's 30-year anniversary is next year, and I think there are so many interesting. I would love to do kind of lead a reading group of Bitcoiners in Infinite Jest and have some discussions. Maybe have some of them be public. There's a colloquy in there about negative and positive freedom in contemporary America, and it is so um, I guess perspicacious would be the word. So incisive,
Yep.
so interesting, and I think just really acute and spot on. That it would be. I wish more people read it. I think that I have a good friend from my best friend from high school. We were kind of literary companions all through high school. He recently got back in touch with me a few months ago, and he had started going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, which was sort of surprising to me because neither of us was ever interested in anything related to money in high school. We were just obsessed with reading novels, and we both
Uh-huh.
thought we were going to be Kerouac and Ginsberg or Franzen and Wallace and that sort of thing. And so he got into is into Bitcoin now, And the lens that he's kind of coming at it from is, he's using a lot of these humanities references, the things like Wallace or Dostoevsky or Kierkegaard's, and coming to it from that end, which I think is really interesting. But a lot of this boils down to negative and positive freedom. And when I say positive freedom, what I mean is freedom two, which is sort of self mastery. This kind of comes out of Isaiah Berlin. Um, it's this freedom to know what to choose, to you have this ocean of choices, but to actually know what to choose, to make that choice, to kind of choose your bindings, so to speak,
Mhm.
not to focus on being totally unbound, but just to choose what binds you and do it wisely. We would call that, I guess, self mastery, self actualization. Contrasting that with negative freedom, which would be freedom from constraints, freedom from the obligation to choose, to make a choice, not having anybody tell you what to choose or try to influence you on what to choose. It's kind of the individual as a sacrosanct space that you cannot influence. And I think both of those things are kind of American, which is when we talk about the Gladstein, when he was talking about Bitcoin reflecting American values. It's really interesting to me because I do think American values kind of have this beautiful equilibrium of both of those things, negative and positive freedom.
Yeah.
And I also think that Bitcoin has this beautiful equilibrium of both of them. But I think in American culture right now, what we've really lost is any healthy conception of positive freedom. I think we are, the culture with 20 million channels, but nobody can pick anything to watch. We just like scroll. And I think the Democrats, I mean, you mentioned this to me a day or two on Twitter that, you think one of the issues with Democrats is they're so focused on negative freedom, on, freedom from, uh, you know, people feeling like people or entities are encroaching, that there's uh, a, a deleterious lack of emphasis on positive freedom. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I think it's kind of a philosophical
Mhm.
shift that needs to maybe happen. But do you do you agree with how I've described that?
Yeah.
And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, my background is in sociology as well. How I came to that in college is I went through about 4 different majors and then combined them all into sociology really. So the focus on people groups, the focus on interactions, the focus on culture being birthed from that and how we got here today. Maybe it's not necessarily to your point on positive freedoms, but I do think just in general the left has a tough time with one of the things that happened to me once I got into Bitcoin is I started to have a more positive outlook on life and not necessarily my own life and friendships and things like that. I mean, partially that for some people, but just the direction of our society that we can go another way, that the world doesn't have to only end in this dark, abysmal place, and that it's just like cool to just be in that depressive state, which I find with a lot of my left friends. So I think what we're trying to do with the progressive Bitcoiners, well, and I think a lot of Bitcoiners are, and you talked about like having Steven on and others, is that, you know, in Bitcoin and just culturally in general, we need to get back to having a good time, to seeing that there is a positive way to interact in our world. I mean, the first Bitcoin article I ever wrote and then sent to Peter McCormack and went on his podcast was I think the title was like Hope for a Generation Found Hopeless, because I was really concerned that young people are just being told and fed that the world is just going to shit. And yeah, you can try, we need to try, but like it's kind of too late on multiple fronts, whether it's affordability, climate, social justice, politics, everything. And I'm like, that's pretty overwhelming, especially for a teenager who they're still working through things into their mid upper 20s, 30s. So to go into a world like that, I'm like, we are failing them in so many regards. So again, whether it's the Democrats playing into that, the Republicans playing into it, but I pick on Democrats a lot because that's the camp I came from. I think there needs to be a spiritual awakening. By what do they mean by that is kind of individual community focus. I think a lot of people need to look inward. Like I see a lot of people in the way they're reacting on social media or in their own life and they're picking cause XYZ or whatever. And I'm like, that person has something broken within them. Then they need to look inward. They need to go to therapy. They need to, I mean, I'm someone that grew up very, conservative evangelical, and I had to process a lot of that over the years and a lot of therapy, a lot of different things to be where I'm at today, to have this different outlook on life. And again, I think perhaps it's not the right philosophical framing, but I think, the Democrats and the left, they give, maybe it's not the philosophical underpinning of kind of positive and negative freedom, but I was having this conversation with um, a Troy Cross. I'll mention this to kind of paraphrase of what we talked about when we were in DC. And Troy's out in Portland, Oregon. And we talked about kind of these liberal bastions, right? And the way that society is made. So Democrats believe in a lot of freedoms that, I'm kind of, the jury's still out for me on certain approaches, but freedom to do drugs, freedom to live in a tent, freedom to do all of these things, right? But no positive freedoms of privacy, have your own money, like it depresses me so much that the American dream doesn't involve a single family home anymore. Just these things that are, maybe it's like I have like Norman Rockwell in my mind, but it's so sad. Now it's like the American dream, especially in, New England cities or elsewhere, major cities, is like 800 square foot apartment. Like if you get one of those and you get on the list, sweet. And I'm like, what happened? What are we doing? It doesn't have to be this way for anyone, period. And it shouldn't be. So again, Democrats leaning into these structures that further cycles of poverty, even if that's not what they intend, even though many just do not think about what they intend or not. Bitcoin and kind of a reawakening of going back to yourself and what agency do you want to have in your life? And I think Bitcoin can give people agency, but then can make you think of other decisions and other things. To sound traditional in some ways, I have a lot of friends on the left. They're so depressed on the outlook of life that they're like, not going to have kids or couldn't imagine having kids. That's so fucking sad.
Yeah, I agree,
Having a
and
daughter
I hate
8
that.
months ago,
I hate
yeah,
that
having a
view.
daughter
Yeah.
8 months ago, like she became my world, but at the same time motivated me to want to like do great things. It was so cool because I thought in one regard, I'm like, okay, she's the only thing that matters to me, but not in a way of like, oh, I'm just going to go fuck it with my job or fight. No, it motivated me to want to do great things in general, whether it's through this endeavor, just in life in general. And, having kids gives you hope. And I'm not here to say that everyone needs to have kids and all of these things, but the reasons I've heard from some friends specifically is complete and utter bullshit. And I'll call it out in the moment, especially from people that I know well for their reasons. And I live in different communities and areas where that is a thing. Just people are not having kids. People are talking as if there's no hope left in the world. And they're like, oh, all we can do is just hang out. And I'm like, that's so sad. That is how democracy dies. They talk about this a lot. That's how culture fails. That's how these things end. I find that Bitcoiners, like, not the anonymous people I'm like, real Bitcoiners I'm meeting in real life are extremely hopeful, optimistic, caring, cheerful people. And I'd like that to seep out into the culture. And I think we have a good chance of doing that. Like you said, increasing podcasts, increasing these things to talk about not just Bitcoin, to talk about, the people behind these stories and what motivates them.
I think the current political system, traffics and kind of monetizes and almost pimps out hopelessness. I think
Uh-huh.
both sides do it in
Yep.
different ways. I think, one side maybe offers chimerical solutions or illusory solutions. The other side is just totally bought in on kind of an infinite regress of oppression, I guess, real and perceived. Um, and I do think that Bitcoin is this, it sounds so cliche to say, but it is kind of this very, very hopeful thing. I think most people who are deep into Bitcoin do feel a deep sense of hope. And I agree with you. I completely I detest the idea that people have of, oh, I'm not going to have kids because of the climate or something like that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Just because it's so defeatist. To me, it's so anti-human, not in the sense that it's like, anti-natalist,
Uh-huh.
or
Yep.
literally anti-procreation, but it's anti-human in the sense that you're, the reason that you're giving is kind of quitting
Yep.
personified.
Yep.
It's kind of like, Matthew McConaughey in True Detective, amazing character, but I don't agree that we should, you know, uh, stop procreating and walk hand in hand to extinction, as he jokes
Right.
with, or
Right.
doesn't joke with, Woody Harrelson. Trey, one of your pinned tweet, I think, on your profile right now
Uh-huh.
is from Andreas, and I think it is the Andreas quote of "Bitcoin is not smooth jazz; it's punk rock." And
What's
as
funny? I just moved it.
oh, you
And
just moved
so,
it, okay.
well, yeah, yeah. So it was the one I have now is like the person standing at the edge of the party, and everyone's like, "Bitcoin number go up," and then I'm like, they don't know that
Mm,
Bitcoin is freedom money. But anyway, that Andreas quote, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so, which is a great quote, and as somebody who has been deeply influenced by punk rock in its various forms, the kind of initial '70s wave, and then '80s hardcore. I would say to me the biggest lesson from punk rock is that you are your own oppressor and you are your own savior. Or as Craig Finn from the Hold Steady would kind of describe the scene later. Getting older makes it harder to remember that we are our only saviors, and I
Mhm.
think that it's very empowering to think of, you know, you can choose to live in a certain kind of darkness. You can choose to live in a defeatism, or you can choose to, um, to not do that, to reject that. And you can choose to kind of, you can become the bird who's grown to love its cage, or you
Mhm.
can reject the cage. And I think people on
Yep.
the left have become the bird that has grown to love the cage, and have become to define themselves by the cage. And so, yeah, so that's kind of, I'm hoping that what we're doing here is, helping to move us in a direction where more people are thinking about it differently and in a more hopeful way. Um, I want to transition to talk a little bit more specifically about TPB and what you guys have on deck for the rest of the year. I know you guys have some big stuff going on, from the 501(c)(3), and you guys, I guess, relatively recently did that. That was probably what, like 6 months ago you did that.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and now you got some. I don't want to reveal anything that hasn't been revealed, so I will let you talk about what you guys got on deck with the organization.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of already talked about the mission with the 501(c)(3) is really just education for anyone who needs it. We're targeting for everyday people, especially progressives, but also for lawmakers that need to hear this to be more educated and well informed. And I think too the kind of tough act. I mean, you talked about Bitcoin influence, right? And this is a whole other almost podcast we can talk about is the money and influence in DC. So again, I don't love DC. I don't love the way politics works. I don't love the way that any of these things work, but I also feel a bit of a obligation, not in a way of like, oh, it keeps me up at night, but in a way of like, okay, who is going to do this kind of Bitcoin from the left thing? Because from the left, it's mostly actually from the left and right, it's mostly crypto industry money. Um, and a lot of Democrats, especially the progressives, they look at you in one of two camps. They're either are you a constituent or are you special interest? And so when they hear that you're trying to sell something, they'll say that's special interest. So there's a different category for that. And it's very influential. We're never going to compete with that. This is billions and billions and billions of dollars in DC from the likes of Ripple, from other folks in the space. And again, our goal at TPB isn't to try to come on and demonize cryptos or get into these things that are just going to turn people off right away. But our approach is that Bitcoin, for instance, makes up 60 to 65% of the market cap of cryptos in general. I think for me and what I like to focus on, the kind of monetary use cases and proof of work mining and things like that, is very interesting. And I think most Americans would interact with that compared to maybe some other crypto projects. Not saying that we need to legislate and destroy other crypto projects. I think we should be fair under law to different enterprises and things like that. But folks in DC still don't understand that difference. Maybe they more and more and more with market structure bills, which does about 75% of what I care about, if I'm being quite frank, in terms of protecting non-custodial wallets and self-custody. That'd be a huge win if we get that into law. But really trying to educate Democratic lawmakers. I mean, one of Elizabeth Warren's staffers was because we were there with the Bitcoin Policy Institute in terms of their event, and they're like, "So you guys had the Bitcoin Policy Institute event yesterday. Why not the Crypto Policy Institute? Why Bitcoin?" So that was a really cool conversation that we were able to just talk about the differences, talk about our approach. And right now in DC, there are two think tank like entities compared to hundreds of others. It is us and BPI are the only ones that have a solely Bitcoin focus. Now, again, people could say whether they think Bitcoin is better than other things, this and that. But regardless of all of that, it's like it's really important to focus on something that is a $2 trillion market cap, really, really vested interest in the US government, apparently, right now, and applicable around the world. There's only two. There needs to be more Bitcoin podcasts, but there needs to be more Bitcoin think tank, all of these things, right? And we can get into other conversations about lobbying and this and that, but just from the education standpoint, we are so we're at the first inning still on education for people that, for better or for worse, they have an influence on what our country looks like. So we can't just not be a part of those conversations. So we're trying to be a part of those conversations in one regard, and then trying to just educate everyday people, because you need both, right? The politicians might not listen at certain angles, but if their voters start to care more, because voters still don't care too much right now. They do, because a lot of people talked about the crypto voter, and I think that was a thing, especially in some swing districts. But for a lot of representatives, they've literally told us it's just not coming up from my constituents. It's not coming up about, I need Bitcoin in my, my cold storage, or what, self custody, or this, these different things that we care about. But we still think it's important. We just think we're a little ahead of the curve with where we're at. So we're teaching voters to care. We're teaching people that this is a good thing to save in. This is a good thing to use. Donors will pick up on that. Politicians will pick up on that. And that's us playing the game a little bit, because we want to actually see change and influence change. So that is what we're doing with the nonprofit. So expect more media from us. We're also trying to do more in-person stuff, possibly with PubKey in the future, which would be exciting. And shout out to Thomas and the whole PubKey crew. They've been super hospitable and supportive and welcoming, and so many other people that I reached out to kind of consult on our project and are big supporters of what we're doing. I will mention to the listeners, we're a 501c3, so if anyone wants to donate, these things are very expensive to do. Like, if we're looking to interact in DC more, that's a lot of money we're going to need to raise to even just barely kind of compete on that front in terms of the time we need to spend and things like that. But we've got a good crew. I've mentioned Mark Stefani as our board president. Awesome to have him at the helm, kind of guiding direction of the organization. Jason Mayer is our director of education, which just completely makes sense, having written a progressives case for Bitcoin, and just really, really good at teaching and talking to people one-on-one. Jason is so um, kind of de-arming. He's just able to walk into a room, and he's a math teacher, so he's really good at teaching very complex things, and he's super smart too, like a really, really brilliant guy. So having him on, we're looking to bring other people on to help us. So, again, if people are looking, a lot of people in the Bitcoin space will reach out to us because they're like, I don't know how to talk to progressives. We're willing to literally help consult, jump on a call. We're going to create more materials, more kind of one pagers for you to hand out, more video content, things like that for you to have. If you'd like us to speak to a group, whether virtually in person, hit us up. We might be able to make that work. In terms of getting folks out there to do that, we're trying to do more of that and really scale up from here. I think next year is a midterm election year. So I think trying to get the message of Bitcoin onto the radar of more progressives, be it voters or Democratic Party, because I am very worried about a backlash to Bitcoin and Bitcoin rights for Democrats that view it as Trump's win. And that is how DC is working right now. It's still very partisan. Democrats that are even cool with Bitcoin are like, I just can't move on it yet or can't move on that legislation yet or whatever, because it's viewed as a Trump win. And that's the silliness of it. So we're building that behind the scenes support so that when people are willing to put their neck out more and more from the left, we'll hopefully see some positive movement. And then I'll slightly mention, I'm also working behind the scenes on a 501c4 to focus specifically on political action. There's no timeline for that. That's still in its infancy of ideas. We're potentially looking at some state involvement. So doing some kind of test runs at certain states. New York might be one of them, in terms of, there's all these different kind of legislative, and New York is a very interesting ground. If you have the far left progressives, you have more of the Richie Torres and people that are more okay with Bitcoin. You've got state level legislators. So that would kind of be a more small endeavor of like hitting in certain moments. Like if there's a piece of legislation we want to go after, for or against, specific small scale things. But the major umbrella, and they would be two separate organizations, as they need to be and should be. But the main umbrella of what the progressive Bitcoin is doing is going to continue being that education, because I think that's going to be important for a very long time.
Yeah, I think so with respect to the Bitcoin, not crypto thing, I really personally, I think everything you said is illuminating and is important. And honestly, following the progressive Bitcoiners journey in DC, and you and I have had a million back and forths about Bitcoin, not crypto stuff. I've been pretty vocal in the past about, there are some things going on in crypto that I think will be useful, and are really interesting. But
Mhm.
I do think I've really come around to, I mean, it is so hard to find any signal in that ocean of noise. It's just, it's very difficult. It's very distracting. You have to spend an absolute ton of time. And I think it's sort of counterproductive. And I think even kind of constantly having the debate about it is counterproductive. And I've really come around to that. That was not my, I've evolved on that. Um, and I think what you said about learning to play the game and having the Bitcoin only folks play the game the way Coinbase is playing the game, um, and having more think tanks. We should certainly have more Bitcoin specific think tanks. We should certainly have more, you know, folks doing kind of Coinbase style, except Bitcoin, you know, focused special interest stuff, lobbying, because it's really just, you know, the Bitcoin and crypto thing. I mean, it's Coinbase is doing their thing. They're extremely effective. I don't think anybody can dispute how effective that they're being. Some of the things that they're doing do have benefits that redound to Bitcoin folks. You know, they've stepped into the breach a few times, but you know, it's an entirely different thing that they're doing. And Bitcoin is kind of its own beast, its own has its own reverberations through culture and society, that I think are more sweeping, more important. So, and I would encourage everybody, you know, whether you agree with Trey, what you perceive to be Trey's political beliefs, or you know Jason's political beliefs, or the progressive Bitcoiner, whether you consider yourself a progressive or not, it's worth, you know, checking out what they're doing. It's worth donating. You know, I certainly do not align, like, you know, issue for issue with Margot, you know, at all. I respect Margot's opinion on everything, but she and I would disagree on a fair amount. But you know, I think the work being done by the org, same thing with Jason, I'm sure. Um, but it's important work. So I mean, I've donated to Progressive Bitcoin. I'll continue to do so, just
Yeah,
because I
and thank
think
you for that.
that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
that's the world that we want to see. Like you just need people in every sort of facet of political life, you know, making the case for why this is valuable. So, um, looking forward to 501c4 too as well. I think that'll be exciting and impactful, and I think that'll be great. I guess another question is there going to be a progressive Bitcoiner conference? If not, why not? Are we all going to go to a Red Sox game afterwards?
Yeah.
How's that going to work?
We want to. We've been kicking it around a lot in many different ways. Could we see one in DC next year? Possibly. I think the trip to DC was illuminating for me because I was like, we need to be here more. I definitely got that sense. When we were there, two things were happening. One, the progressive Bitcoiner. Like I'd be in rooms and there are some former Democrats that are now in lobbying and consulting groups that were from the Biden camp or even previously, but they left that world and now they feel more free to engage. They'll be sitting in the back of rooms. They're kind of at the corner, they're this and that. And then a few of them came up to me afterwards, like, here's my card, let's jump on a call. So that happened because I said, hi, I'm Trey from the Progressive Bitcoiner. Full stop. And they were like, interesting. Let's talk. I want to hear more about that. That alone, I'm like, oh, there's a huge appetite for like what we're doing. Two, we talked about the Bitcoin not crypto thing. You know, the imagine this, like the Democrats are still in shock from FTX and SBF. So that is like I don't blame them for, you know, seeing kind of crypto and special interests, like assuming that everything is a scam and people are just here to make money for their own interests or whatever, because the vast majority, that's the case, including possibly some Bitcoiners with Bitcoin interest or whatever, right? So us coming in as a 501c3 supporting Bitcoin for everyday people and like everyday Americans. We're not a company. We're not sure, I guess, in some indirect way, it's like, okay, it increases Bitcoin's value, but we're talking about, you know, having people like stack sats, pretty low income, just using Bitcoin, right? It's not, we're not doing any activities that might necessarily, you know, have Michael Saylor buy 10 billion more the next day. Like that's not the type of educational engagement we're doing. So I think that as well opened up the conversation more because we're that 501c3 arm. We're not a company. We're not industry. We're not, that approach was super helpful as well. So DC became like, okay, it's really going to need a spotlight. I think the two places you'll see the most activity from us, probably physically, is, I mean, probably three. Like technically, we don't have like an office space or whatever, but I'm closest to Boston, and I think Boston is still a nice hub. It's my home and it's where I live. So maybe some more in-person stuff there. There's not really much of a Bitcoin scene in Boston. There's a, Foundation is in Boston, a great company. MIT's Bitcoin Club is doing awesome stuff. A lot of it on the technical end, but in terms of the political education think tank realm, very little to none. So expect more from us, especially in New York and DC. I think those are the two biggest places right now, just because of the relationships we have, and the alliances we have, and working very closely in parallel with Bitcoin Policy Institute. Like I've told people, I think you should support us and BPI because we're doing similar things, but we're in our separate lanes and our separate approach. And BPI has been wildly successful with appealing to the American government, appealing to everyday people as well through some of their fellowship work, but kind of orange pilling on that side, and we're going to orange pill on our kind of progressive everyday people side, and both are really important to DC. There's a lot of money coming into DC from other places, so look into it. Look into what we're doing if folks have questions about our approach versus theirs, but support us both. Support Bitcoiners that are well intentioned doing the work because politicians are getting very confused still. So we have a long ways to go.
Agreed. Well said. The last couple questions I want to ask you, Trey, are a little bit of, I don't want to say a detour. It's more of, but sort of the issues that I care a lot about, and I'm hoping to have a lot of conversations about on this show. Is, do you think that your relationship with art, whether that be music, books, literature, film, regardless of the medium, your relationship with art, do you think it has changed as a result of the exigencies, and the urgencies of and the demands of a fiat environment? And if so, do you think it has changed negatively or positively?
Huh. In terms of my relationship to art and seeing that being degraded because of the fiat system.
Yeah. Do you think that, you as a human being now versus maybe, let's say, 10 years ago, do you feel like we were talking a little bit earlier about how the American dream is getting depressingly, diminishingly narrowed in the scope
Mhm.
of what people expect. And I think part of that is not just materially speaking in terms of, can you buy a single family home? Can you get a job that is able to finance a family of four on a single income? But also, I think looking at our interior lives, kind of psycho spiritually, and the bandwidth that we have, to explore our humanity through things like art. My contention would be that I think fiat and its, just kind of increasingly sort of the brutality of it almost, has degraded our collective bandwidth to engage as an audience with things like that. And I think that's to our detriment as human beings. And most of my friends who I know who were, big time readers or, consumers of art, in various mediums, when they were younger, have now, as more mature adults, often with children and jobs and all that stuff, have found themselves completely detached with their attention spans absolutely nuked, and have trouble now actually just opening up a book and reading 20 pages of it. Do you feel any of that? Um, how do you think about that, or do you think I'm off?
No, no, no. I think you're 100% right on. And I'm trying to, because it, once you've been in Bitcoin long enough, I think it's such a blend of like, and I do talk about this kind of American values, civil liberties, rights, and just individual time. That blend, like Bitcoin is a part of that, like intimately. So what a lot of Bitcoiners talk about and what Bitcoin does, and it teaches you how to try to create more time for yourself and value time in general. Hopefully, again, whether it's saving in Bitcoin so that you can give more time back to yourself, whether that's a retirement or whether people are lucky enough to have more time now, because of that savings, or it reorients your priorities. What you viewed as a rat race, whether it's in your job or whether it's in this or that, it kind of reprioritizes things. And I think Bitcoin brings that simplicity to people, that kind of, whether it's kind of that hard money standard and values and those kind of things. So that for me, that's personally what it's done. Maybe for other people, not necessarily. And I think people are willing to create and engage in art and more meaningful, thoughtful pursuits if they have time. So I think one of the biggest things this fiat system has robbed people of is time. Like today, technologically, everything health wise, we should have more time than ever. And again, I go back to Bernie sometimes because from where I was 5, 10 years ago to now, I disagree with Bernie on more than I did 10 years ago. But certain things that he is pursuing and talking about, like a shorter work week, we can and should be there today with some of these things, or a shorter work week and some of that typical employment style things so that you have more time to pursue other things. Now, some people's approach to that would be a no jobs UBI, right? It's not necessarily my approach to it anymore. But again, a fiat robs people of time. And I think people need time to sit and reflect, to be able to engage in this type of art, and people literally looking to engage in art and meaningful pursuits being robbed of that from a focus on STEM that I was hugely a part of in my work with youth development and youth workforce development. A huge focus on STEM, which again, I'm kind of fearful of that now we're not teaching people how to think. We're not teaching people how to, appreciate things. We're not teaching people XYZ about the meaning of life, the meaning of things. Not that I think there's a singular meaning of life, but giving people time to explore what does that mean to them. So I think very practically, Bitcoin gives people back their time if they save and focus on, I want to have more of this thing so I have more time. And that's why I say Bitcoin is also freedom money. Like it's freedom go up technology. And what I mean by that, we were talking about positive, negative freedoms. It's also freedom from having an abusive boss, an abusive relationship if you have your own finances, especially for women, an abusive whatever situation may be, like having your time be given back via Bitcoin. It just reorients your priorities. And then so for me, I try to think about how can I get as much time back as possible to be with my family and to make a difference in the world. That is different than what I thought 5 years ago. And then that intertwines with you're talking about art and literature and all these things. Those things are deeply needed to give people a sense of what's important to them. So I do have a big fear for that. But I think Bitcoin itself helps with that. But I think Bitcoiners help with that tremendously.
And that is certainly my hope. I think it's really well said, by the way. I think one of the most fiat things that I've seen recently is these big universities. The University of Chicago actually just did a little bit of it, which is, I have a graduate degree from the University of Chicago in the humanities, and they just cut or consolidated a bunch of humanities programs. I think the University of Indiana has just absolutely axed huge swaths of their humanities degrees,
Mm.
and the reason given is always a financial one. It's always, this you don't make money this way. They don't give back money to the school unless you go make money and all that stuff. And to me, it's kind of your. It might be practically true right now in the current fiat environment, but I find it very depressing. I find it very kind of anti-human. And what I'm
Uh-huh.
hopeful for when it comes to Bitcoin and Bitcoiners, like you just said, is that we can flip that. And I would love to see instead of these institutions kind of bowing down to the way that culture and society is working now in sort of fiat world, which I find pretty depressing, looking for ways to subvert that or reorient that in a
Mhm.
way that is more human focused. So hopefully we can play some small part in doing that. Trey, what is the or what would you say is a work of art, whether that again is a book, a film, a piece of music, a song, a painting, that has had the biggest impact on you and why?
Man.
I should have prepped you for that one. That's
No,
a
no, no,
big one.
that's good. That's good. Because there's so many. Um, Darjeeling Limited by Wes Anderson. It's probably one of my favorite films. I'm actually not one of those people, like a lot of Wes Anderson's films get really repetitive for me. I will be honest. Many of them I love. I love what he does. He does his thing and he does it well. But Darjeeling Limited for me, I watched that. It was an undergrad 2010 to 2014. It came out somewhere around then. Went through a big phase of that with just film, literature, all of these things. I went to a small Christian liberal arts film. We had some wild foreign films in our library too that I think the donors and trustees, if they knew about that, would be like Dogtooth is this crazy Greek film. Oh man. Anyway,
Yeah, no dogtooth. Yeah,
yeah, there's a lot of very influential film, but Darjeeling Limited for me is it's so cozy. It feels like home. It's so fun. It's full of adventure. It's so weird and quirky, but it ties in everything that I deeply care about and think about and wrestle with. It's like family dynamics, death, adventure, finding purpose, these brothers hanging out together. It's just a really cool, fun film. I think it's pretty short too. Maybe it's like an
it
hour and
is.
a
Yeah,
half,
I
hour
want. It's probably
45.
almost exactly 90 minutes, I would say.
I'm kind of a firm believer, your film should be an hour 20, hour 30. You can do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, make it a series. I'm kind of at, but again, maybe my attention span is worse these days. So anyway, that's probably for me. I mean, there's all sorts of other music, and gosh, whether it's the Beatles, whether it's Nirvana. I'm a huge sucker for shoegaze. Just there's so many. But Darjeeling, if you haven't seen it, just watch it. Maybe you'll hate it, but for me, it was
I will
deeply profound.
co-sign. I will co-sign the Darjeeling Limited. I think what Wes Anderson does really well, I don't know if you would agree with this, is I think he navigates. He explores the idea of failure really well, and
Yeah.
friendship as well, like male
Mhm.
friendship. But I think the World of Tenenbaums is about
Yes.
failure, and what that
Yeah.
means, and how people respond to it, how it changes your life, and what kind of grows out of that, what's left. And I find that really interesting. But I think there's kind of an aspect of that in a lot of his films. There's certainly some of that in the Darjeeling Limited.
Mhm.
But yeah, to me, first four films of Wes Anderson's are it's pretty good run.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
All right, Trey. Well, listen, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got a lot going on, so I want to say thank you for coming on the show. I really
Yeah,
really
thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
We'll definitely do it again. Um, some plugs that I want to make here at the end is the one pagers that you referenced. I have seen, I think the one that you referenced that Jason put together. It is quite good. I would definitely recommend folks check that out if you have people in your life who are left leaning politically, who would otherwise have maybe a little bit of an allergy to Bitcoin talk. I would definitely check out the one pager. It is good. Highly recommend. And as we've said before, go check out the Progressive Bitcoiner if you haven't already. If you're able to donate, please do. It's truly a good thing. And Trey, where can people find you? Where can people follow you and the Progressive Bitcoiner and kind of get more involved?
Yeah, so Progressive Bitcoiner, we try to run everything through our website, whether it's, podcast, whatever. I mean, podcast, you can find it everywhere as well once we kind of get that going a bit more again, but it's progressivebitcoiner.org. You'll find everything you need there. You'll be able to reach out to us through there, donate, all of that good stuff. I'm at K Trey Walsh on most socials. I'm on Nostr as well for those that are on Nostr, but you can find me on X. Type in my name on LinkedIn, whatever. Pretty out there in public, which is rare for some Bitcoiners, but I wasn't from that cypherpunk cool world before I came in, so I'm pretty out there with my persona and who I am and my real name and all that good stuff. So you can find me there.
And for what you do, I think it's important for you to be out there. It's important for people to know who
Yes.
you are, and kind of where you come from and that sort of thing. So I think that's good. So, all right. Well, Trey, thank you very much for being on the show, and we will talk to you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Logan.